All right, so good evening. We're going to start the February 27th Planning Commission meeting. Again, apologies that we're a little late. We had a work session, and they're always hard to get out of there in time.
You grab his.
So we don't have, are you running the whole show? Can you do the call, the roll call?
Yes, I can. Commissioner Miranda?
Here.
Commissioner Lee?
Here.
Commissioner Thorson?
Present.
Commissioner Melton?
Here.
Commissioner Nemerov?
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Here.
Commissioner Bennett?
Here.
Chair Olson?
Here, thank you. The next was the approval of the meeting agenda. And the one, we have an updated agenda in front of us, and the meeting minutes from the past meeting have been removed because they weren't completed yet. So those will be on the next agenda. So is there anything else that people would like to amend or approve?
I move approval of the minutes as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm listening to what you're saying.
Second that.
Yeah. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. So we have two public hearings tonight. The first is a variance request at 4630 Drexel.
Chair and members of the Planning Commission, this is a variance request for 4630 Drexel Avenue. The subject property is located at the corner of Drexel Avenue and Country Club Road, as highlighted. It consists of a two-story home with an attached garage that's side-loading. The garage faces north. You'll notice that there are two curb cuts and driveways, one that is attached to Drexel and one also that is attached to Country Club. This is an existing survey of the property. The house was built in 1924, and it's very original. There hasn't been a whole lot done to the home. The new property owners would like to add on to the home, which includes, you can see the dashed outline is the footprint addition. They will be adding a garage to the back of the home. It will be a rear loading garage, and it will be continued to access off of Country Club. The curb cut that is along Drexel Avenue will be removed. Currently, the front door is facing the corner. They will straighten it out and have it face Drexel Avenue. There will be improvements to the second story, an addition of a second story along with that back garage addition. And the area that I've highlighted in orange is actually the area that concerns the Planning Commission this evening. That area overlaps the minimum 10-foot required side yard setback. The north wall is currently at 8.2 feet, which is non-conforming. They can add on to the first floor by an equal amount of encroachment, which they're just adding a small space here, so it's not as much as they could do according to our ordinance to maintain that existing non-conforming setback. However, they would like to put second floor area above that, which would require a variance. So this is a little more detailed plan of the first floor. The addition that we're talking about is 1.8 feet of overlap, which will match the existing non-conforming setback, and it will just merely stack onto what's there right now. This driveway will be removed. All of this hard surface will be removed. So to the upper left is the existing footprint. To the lower right is the footprint in gray with the new additions. This is showing that area of improvement on that main floor that does, it's non-conforming, but it conforms to our alternate setback standard on the main floor. And then that was the main floor as well, but then the upper floor, this is showing you that stacked addition, the 1.8 foot overlap into the required setback area. All of the other improvements that they're proposing do conform to the setback height coverage requirements. So this is the new look of the south side of the home. And then the front, and what you'll notice highlighted again in orange is that area of encroachment. So this is really the only part or piece of the whole project that requires a variance. And then this would be from the side. This is the north elevation and the rear elevation. And again, south elevation. And this is showing that the improvements in context with the homes that are existing on either side. This entire project has already been in front of the Heritage Preservation Board, I think probably 2 times, Emily, I believe. And they did receive a certificate of appropriateness, so they have already reviewed this. They've approved the plan. It follows their guidelines, and that is always intentional. We have the Heritage Preservation Board review any project that requires a certificate of appropriateness in the Country Club District in order for them to weigh in on the entire project prior to, if there are any variances required, through the Planning Commission. And so here's a few angles showing that front elevation, or a few shots, pardon me, showing the front elevation. This is existing. This is with the new improvements. And again, it's that piece right here on the north side that maintains that existing non-conforming setback. There was an engineer's report within your packet. The drainage and grading plan associated with the project does not propose any issues or drainage onto neighboring private property. The existing runoff associated, or the proposed runoff for the associated with the project, will be directed towards Drexel and Country Club. So the proposed variance, they must demonstrate that they will be relieving a practical difficulty. The practical difficulty is caused by the existing location of the home. It was built in 1924 under different rules. The proposed addition and requested variance is reasonable on the north side due to the proposed addition not furthering the non-conforming setback to the north. They're going to be maintaining an existing non-conforming setback. The second floor addition will maintain that setback and is very minimal. It's only that piece that is currently a one-story addition. Are there circumstances that are unique to the property, not common to every similarly zoned property? The house has the existing non-conforming setback built many years ago prior to our current ordinance. At that time, there were no variances granted, so that it was a conforming solution. And granting the variance to the north of the property will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The Heritage Preservation Commission has already weighed in and reviewed and supports the design and has issued a certificate of appropriateness for this particular project. Staff does recommend approval, given the findings as well as the Heritage Preservation Commission review. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris? No? Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Sue, go for it.
Chris, did you say that curb cut with the sidewalk, the curb cut's going to go away?
The north driveway
Yeah.
and curb cut will be eliminated.
Okay, and in its place will be a sidewalk?
They will have to extend that sidewalk, and the curb along the street will have to be, they'll have to fill that gap.
Okay, yeah. The sidewalk I'm talking about is on their property. They're going to put their own sidewalk in there, right?
Oh, yeah, they did
Okay.
show that in their plan, I think if we back up.
Yeah, the photos
It's
still
gonna be,
show
it'll be
the curb.
straightened out towards Drexel, I believe the plan, there we go.
Yep.
In blue. They're proposing, this is the proposed sidewalk because they're going to be straightening out that front door, and they will be eliminating this sidewalk. They will also be, I'm sorry, I thought you meant the driveway on the north side, that will be removed. This will have to be extended, the sidewalk between the two pieces, and they will also have to correct the curb along the street.
So the proposed walk, what is that flare out attempting to show? Looks like a curb cut. I don't know.
It does, I mean, that would be a question for the designer.
Okay, thank you.
Great, so is the applicant here? Yes. And could you come up and give your name and address, and we might have questions. Thanks.
I'm actually the designer for the property, so. Tom Rauscher, and with Rauscher and Associates. I've seen you guys before, so. Your question was the flare out. I think it's just gonna be a little wider landing spot for people to park and drop off in there. So it's a little wider flare to the sidewalk at the curb. It's not a curb cutout. Yeah.
Were there any other questions for the? Yeah. All right, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this is a public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak? Seeing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Public hearing is closed. Motion carried. So bringing it back to the Planning Commission, any comments, motions? You got a comment?
I just have one comment, which is it's always nice when someone walks up, smiles, and says, "I've seen you guys before," and continues smiling.
I move approval of the variance, subject to the conditions and finding outlined in the staff memo.
Second.
All in favor? Any discussion? Sorry, I know there's not going to be any. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's sweet and fast, yeah. Yeah, those were really nice graphics. Okay, so the next Planning Commission is the Greater Southdale District Design Experience Guidelines.
Thank you. Madam Commissioner, members of the Commission, my name is Mick Johnson with Architecture Field Office, and this evening we want to go through the Design Experience Guidelines, a brief sort of summary, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. A little bit about background and context. We started this process about 3 years ago, beginning with working principles that identified really the attitudes and goals that we expected from the various opportunities that this district had to offer. We then proceeded in phase 2 with the district urban design framework. We got at design issues that we felt were important in the potential of the district, and then Phases 3 and 4 were to articulate guidelines, the experience guidelines. And throughout the process, it's really been more about experience than anything else. And so the design experience guidelines are a companion to the Greater Southdale District Plan for the City of Edina's 2018 Comprehensive Plan. That outlines the kind of high-level planning and design strategies for the public realm, site and building design supporting the desired experience outcomes. Just a couple other things. The experience guidelines sets a baseline for guidance for developers, designers, City of Edina staff, and planning commissioners and members of the City Council when proposing, designing, and evaluating projects in the Greater Southdale District. Before, we really didn't have a context from which to view the Southdale District, and the guidelines help us from a kind of continuing point of view or continuity point of view, allow that sort of discussion to unfold with background knowledge about how the district might develop. And basically, these are not a substitute for the City of Edina zoning codes. They're a part of the conversation that begins to highlight what the issues are, what the concerns are, and what the opportunities are. The companion documents I bring your attention to of the Greater Southdale District Plan is goal and policy redevelopment framework. All of those components are really a part of the experience guidelines and need to be read together because they provide different kinds of information, but when combined, give you a very holistic view of the opportunities and design opportunities for the district as a whole. So the design framework, we began with the 200-foot grid, which we've done a number of studies that related to a number of other cities across the country, focused a lot on Portland, Oregon, which has a very walkable city. The 200-foot grid really helps you identify scale issues and opportunities to make buildings that sort of begin to fit together, avoiding very long walls and architecture that is not as rich as other buildings might be, but together they make a community, which is really important in the Southdale District. We identified potential building sites, and these stretch across the whole district, including up to Fred Richards Park and Highway 100. So you begin to see the magnitude of the district and the opportunities that begin to bind this place together. The building sites we then broke down into the 200-foot grid, and you can begin to see the number of buildings that might eventually evolve into this district. The white shows the footprint of the building, perhaps, or the block. The red identifies spaces between the buildings, and I'd like to note that it does not mean that there's going to be roads around all of those buildings. What it means is there's a great opportunity for green between the buildings. And to further that, if you look at all the major streets that exist in the district today, those are the opportunities for access to those buildings. So a great deal more of the landscape that we normally see in cities as being given over to the automobile will be reserved for pedestrians and landscaping and other amenities that really reinforce a 21st century community. We thought in the public realm experience that connections were important, that they connect intersections through the typologies and incorporate green systems. We wanted to make sure that there was a knitting of this together. The north-south promenades sensitively transition to single-family residential neighborhoods. We want to always make sure we're respecting those neighborhood components, those folks that exist both in architecture and socially, culturally. We wanted to manage stormwater water as amenity, and that is something that gets buried today, but to daylight it would be an opportunity to enliven the district with other kinds of water-related amenities. And we wanted to increase the number of sidewalks, pathways, and smaller parks, gardens, just to better identify opportunities to move through the district in a really wonderful kind of experienced way. We wanted to look at intersections. It's important that the typologies that we're going to show you connect those intersections throughout the district. And the experiences, they want to link those experiences from one neighborhood to the next. So we look at intersection as being a really important aspect of this, and the typologies reinforce that. Things about the street room typologies, lower facade heights take precedent. When you're moving from one kind of place to another, you want to make sure the architecture is compatible and that there is a scale reference to the place you've been, to the place you're going. The architecture of the facade, one block making up the intersection, should be conceived as part of all the other corners of the intersection. So when you look at an intersection, you see it as an ensemble and not four independent corners, because you really want to see that as a place and not just a place for cars, a place for people. The street room form, along all major corridors, 75% of the building face needs to be along the street. That means that to form a street room, you really need to have buildings come to that edge and make sure there's a presence there and they're not sort of moving in and out and not forming a kind of continuity of a street wall that reinforces pedestrian movement. All the building facades in the district must have 75% transparency. It works both ways. People can see out and people can see in. So there is that kind of safety, but there's also this enlivened kind of environment that says people live here and they're doing things. All the building facades are prime, including parking, which means that there's no backside to any of these buildings. You should always be able to walk around the whole building and experience something that's positive towards the public realm. All facades on the first vertical 60 feet of the building above grade shall use natural materials. We want that to be things like brick or tile or stone, things that people are familiar with and give you a sense of the history of place, but also the history of great places that we've seen around the world that really include those kinds of materials. And then no building facade longer than 200 feet. The worst thing you can happen with a building is for it to repeat itself for 300 or 400 feet. You don't get the connections for pedestrians, you don't get the passage through the buildings, and it makes, if you're on the north side and this kind of weather on this kind of day, a long, cold walk. Building form, all development services, rooftop mechanical equipment, all that needs to be concealed from the public realm. There's no reason to have any of that visible on any facade of the building. It can go inside, it can be screened through the architecture, but it should not be visible. And building footprints above 60 feet should be no greater than 12,000 square feet. For residential, this is really important because most buildings will be residential, which means that the footprint then represents the size of the shadow casting across the landscape. The smaller the footprint, the smaller the shadow, the faster it passes over other buildings. And so that makes or ensures that we're not having shadow landing on the same spot all day long. So what is the street room in these two images? The cornice at the lower level on the left really establishes a framework along with the lighting, and that gives you a sense of place. The buildings on the right, it's really the cornice at the top of the building along with the trees that begin to give you a sense of the street room. In the left-hand photograph, it really has to do with the scale of these one-story and two-story buildings and the fact that the street really doesn't have any vehicles other than bicycles and pedestrians. It could have, but it's really dominated by the pedestrian experience, and therefore all the furniture and all of that is spread out through the space, which gives you the kind of pedestrian sense of place kind of characteristics. The two images on the left really are dealing with lighting that really controls that then in a nighttime situation, and it can be a party-like environment, or it can just be simple lighting that makes sure the pedestrians have a safe environment to walk through. The image on the left is, again, maintaining a certain height that represents a scale that's important to the pedestrian, and taller buildings are set back so that that experience with the taller buildings is really out of sight. It's more about what you're doing at the street level. The buildings on the right hand are downtown Minneapolis. You can see that on South Nicollet Mall, where the buildings don't exceed 60 feet at the street level, and then step back for taller buildings, which gives you that sense, again, of what it's like being in a space or in a place that is really defined by the cornice and not by the height of larger buildings. So the street room typologies, there are 8 of them that are really what we focused on. You can see that they range across the whole district. Not every street is absolutely covered. I'll note that the typology 3, which is about local streets, are yet to be identified. Those will come through development. But the primary streets that are already exist today, we've identified how they work, what the scale is, and the typology associated with that, so that developers and others can understand the continuity that we're trying to achieve throughout all of the major streets in the district. The transition zones are really key. We have existing neighborhoods that have single-family houses that are transitioning into 3-story apartments, townhouses, a variety of other kinds of buildings. We want to ensure that those transitions really meet goals for the neighborhood that exists, as well as goals for the future district. Most of that is on the west side in Cornelia neighborhood, and on the east side as it faces residential areas, or excuse me, on the east side, yes, as it faces the residential areas of Richfield. So the typology 1A, and I'm just going to go through a couple typologies, not all of them, is the Werniff West Promenade. And you can see the diagram on the page. The diagram at the top of the page is your from right to left, single-family residence. You might have a residential street transitioning to townhouses with a maximum height of 36 feet on the west side of the West Promenade. On the east side, the height limit's 50 feet. This is a way in which you can maintain the quality of the 60-foot wide street and the experience of being in a pedestrian-oriented street. And as you move closer to France, the maximum height is 60 feet. So through that corridor, you were able to establish a relative scale change that doesn't really then impact going back to the neighborhood, the smaller single-family houses. So you can see examples of those at the bottom of the page from left, sort of apartments, or that might be closer to that 50-foot height limit, and then in the center, condominiums or townhouses that might be at the 36-foot height limit, and then to the right, the kind of experience that you would think you would want to have on that promenade, which is more neighborhood kinds of experiences, people who know each other, destination to have a coffee, to do many things other than pass through. And then the typology 5, which is the boulevards, like France, 66th, York, and then 78th and 77th going west to Highway 100. I think that, again, this idea that the buildings have a certain kind of scale reference in them at 60 feet, but these buildings get taller as it relates to the north end and the south end of France Avenue, for example. Those are the higher density areas. You have a reference at 60 feet, which kind of establishes a minimum height at the street. In this case, the image on the diagram on the right goes up to 108 feet, which is 7 to 8 stories, and then steps back away from the street. And then the one on the left shows what it might be like at 60 feet. We drew a lot from the Champs-Élysées in Paris, which is of similar width street from setback to setback, which is about 200 feet. The buildings range in that 60 to 105 foot height limit. Because the width of the street, it really is not a burden on the shadow, a shadow that would cast on pedestrians. And in particular, France is a north-south street, so the shadow would be minimal at the highlight of the noonday, which is, there's a great deal of activity that normally happens in those kinds of streets. So you see on the left, the double rows of trees down France, down the Champs-Élysées, which we expect on France, an image that shows people in that street, filled between the trees, the buildings and the trees, and then the same street as a market. So lots of variety can happen on a street of that nature. These are the rest of the typologies that are in the report that goes through all of those strategies about how each of them fit into the overall context of Edina. And then finally, 10 things to remember. Every new development begins with a 200-foot square block. Every block or building in the development will need streets to connect between buildings or places between buildings. Buildings will not be greater than 200 feet in length. Building footprints above 60 feet are limited. All streets are not equal, so we want to make this a rich variety. These designated transition zones are about maintaining the quality of life in those places. Promenades, east-west streets are the bridge, so those kind of corridors are really important as part of the transition and connecting you then to the north and south. Within the first 60 vertical feet of a building, primary material should be natural, traditional, things that, you know, create memories and make you remember what it's like being in one of those places that you've always enjoyed. And then transparency at the ground level facing the public realm. If we can't see what's in a building, then you don't know if that's a building for you. And we want the sense of community to stretch in and out of buildings constantly so that there's engagement with the street room, and with the rest of the community. With that, I'll conclude.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion questions for Mick? Yeah.
Obviously, one of the challenges with the district is parking and getting people there and then out of their cars enjoying the district. Do these design guidelines preclude something like wrapping a parking ramp?
No, they do not. In fact, that's an important part. If there is parking, we prefer to go underground because that eliminates that kind of dead zone. But if you, wrap the parking structure with townhouses, with other kinds of activities, ensuring that the ground level is made for retail and other community services, then that building begins to serve the community. So it's not a negative, but if it stands alone as just a parking structure, then that can be a huge negative because it then creates the dead zone.
Hi, so I was just wondering, when it's unpleasant to walk around, as it is sometimes in Minnesota, I was wondering if, encouraging wooners and other design elements that are meant especially to encourage pedestrian activity could maybe inhibit people from using cars and other methods of transportation?
No, the Warners themselves are, they can also be occupied by cars. So it doesn't limit the use of cars through those areas. In fact, they're really important as a point of creating service zones at the edges of them. So cars coming in and out of parking most likely would come off a major street, come into the Warner briefly and then go to parking, below grade parking, or they can drive down, pick somebody up, park briefly for a short period of time. It's just not a street that encourages a lot of through traffic. What I found is in great environments that you don't mind putting on a coat and hat and getting a little chilly if it's a great place to walk. And I think those are some of the characteristics that we've tried to include, is that to make this really work, then people do have to get out and enjoy it at all seasons. Thank you.
What I have is more of a comment. Is that acceptable at this time, or should we hold on comments?
Wait until after the public hearing, but I don't know that we,
Thank you.
yeah. So any other questions?
Thank you, Mick. I think that was a culmination of a lot of hard work, so I think you summarized it well. I just want to be clear that I understood it clearly. There is no calling for any type of podium at the street height of around 20 feet for any of these? Is there anything like that in the design guidelines?
Well, if I understand the question, Commissioner, what we set is that there's a kind of maximum height that we don't want to exceed. We do say that the ground floor should be a minimum of 20 feet. So if there is an unusual situation in which the building is 20 feet and then steps back, 20 foot in height and then steps back to meet other sorts of goals, that's a possibility. The other thing we've said, though, that if you're building buildings within the district, then you need to respect your neighbor, and scale is an important part of that. And we haven't really specified what that is, but that's a kind of discussion that needs to happen. It's like the intersection where you want buildings to all be compatible at an intersection. You don't want one that's 60 feet and one that's 20 feet. You want them to all sort of share that scale reference and activity to the intersection. So in some cases we've said, please come up to 60 feet.
So in some cases then a building that has a flat front facade is acceptable by the design guidelines.
Right.
We're not looking to create a street wall that is uniform.
Correct. It should move up and down. I mean, we don't want a wall that's everything is at 60 feet. I would imagine that would be, a bit boring. Even the Champs-Élysées, has a lot of variation in the roof edges and the heights of buildings that vary, a couple of stories. And I think that that's a reasonable thing to expect. If you look at the history of Main Street America, 1, 2, 3, 4 stories kind of set that sort of variation that makes it all approachable. One of the important things about that, though, is that first floor is always transparent historically, because that's how you really showed off your wares if you have a shop or you wanted to advertise what's going on in the inside. So those variations are okay. It's just that you have to come out to the street edge that we've set, the setback line, and that's really the important thing. The other aspect of this is that if you maintain the landscape with a series of trees that we actually did not get into this in any great detail, but you know that trees will grow larger than 60 feet tall. And eventually the canopy of all the trees within these setbacks should dominate the experience. So that architecture is then part of seeing through the trees, so the trees filter everything. And you really have then a secondary kind of canopy over your head, which is made by the landscape itself. And then the cornice of the architecture then is the next line that sort of gives you a visual cue about the space that you're in.
So it sounds like the trees, especially since you're after the Champs-Élysées kind of model, are just as important when we review a development proposal, especially on France, in that front public zone, as the building itself. So sometimes we tend to minimize that discussion, but you're saying that is every bit as important because we're trying to establish this tree line down that, to give that room feel around France?
That's
Okay.
Exactly correct,
Okay.
Commissioner.
And then the last question I had was, I read the plan, but I don't get a real clear sense of where you might see or where the design guidelines might point to the tallest buildings. Where would that go in this greater Southdale district?
When we look at the district and imagine how it might, evolve, we believe that the north end up towards the hospital is an area where taller buildings might happen, especially on the south, on the mall site. We also look at the south end because it's closer to 494. That would be a place where you would expect businesses or larger office kinds of buildings, research or whatever may go on there. Those are kind of the zones for that. In the center of the district, the further you get away from the neighborhoods, I think the buildings might want to be a little bit taller, just on, as was Hazleton Road, which is a building that's, I think, 15 or 16 stories that's been approved. Those are places in the center of the district where you could expect taller districts, or taller buildings. But as you move towards the edges and towards the transition zones, they should naturally get lower.
And that is sort of the typical city. Minneapolis is like that too. We see some of the tallest buildings in the center, and gradually as you go out from it, they shorten. So I imagine that if we have tall buildings come before us, we need to give some thought as to the placement. It's not as if it's like just fair game wherever it happens to, the land values seem to support it, or it's really to be deliberate about where that height is. And probably you're saying, since we have a couple tall buildings around the west in that area, that in some ways that might be sort of a marker for us at this point in time, although there could be other ones, who knows? I mean, the district's quite large, but to respect sort of that kind of typology.
Yes, and I think it starts with Centennial Lakes, which is a fairly dense kind of office development area, and the further north you go, especially towards Southdale, the mall, then I expect you along that whole promenade that you should find a rich variety of buildings that are set back away from the promenade and then have higher heights in that area, because that would actually increase intensity along those corridors, bring more places for people to go, as you kind of get the experience of hopefully going all the way from Struckhauer Park south to Centennial Lakes and then up to Fred Richards, which is really the spine of the center spine of the whole district.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other question? Commissioner Navarro.
So the document, every street room talks about height, and several of them talk about podium height. But would you agree that the purpose of this document isn't, I mean, although it does talk about height, the core purpose of this is to try to drive excellence in building design and the experience of the district, and you don't want to lose sight of that?
I think that, Commissioner, that is the primary goal of the document, is to increase the dialogue about what the quality of the experience is going to be. What kinds of architecture are we going to build here? What should that reflect in terms of, like we said, about materials, but also the scale and organization of those buildings relative to landscape, relative to the kind of street that you're making. So all those are all parts of that first dialogue that you begin to have between yourselves, developers, landowners, about qualities that you are expecting in the Southdale district. So the design guidelines provide guidance to that sort of set of questions that need to be asked over and over and over again until everyone on both sides begin to understand what Edina is evolving, the Southdale district is evolving into, which is a place that is, I think, richer than it is today. It will have same number of cars, but you won't see them, and you'll have a far greater number of experiences that are more, enjoyable than you do today, especially as a pedestrian, as a neighbor, as a potential person who lives in the heart of the district.
It just occurred to me. So the design guidelines, you started off by saying this is not zoning, these are guidelines, design experience guidelines. And yet the plan itself also didn't give much guidance in terms of zoning. I'm sure you're familiar with form-based zoning. And in some ways, some parts of the design guidelines almost feel like they lend themselves very much to that. You've already done the diagrams. That's essentially what it is. Would you encourage or would you recommend any use or incorporation of some types of form-based code in order to even clarify this even further within our zoning ordinances?
Commissioner, I think that that our attitude was to go to a point where we thought we could define, the basic form of the district as it related to streets. Form-based codes tend to get into architecture a good deal more than we felt was really important at this point. We have not done a master plan. We've done guidance. I think a master plan might articulate certain aspects of a form-based code that would be important to articulate in greater detail. But that is a study, I think that's the next step, if you will. And that's the same study that would say about trees and what the trees should be in the district and what plantings might be like, what the transition is for global warming and how things are going to change, and what is the metrics that we'll use to really identify those qualities, again, in more specific detail that you expect landowners and developers to adhere to.
Do you recommend that we follow up in the future with a master plan then?
I do. I think that's an important part. The master plan would give you a lot more in terms of detail in surfaces, what intersections should be actually like, what kinds of street furniture you're going to adhere to, what kind of bus stops you'd like to have, what they feel like, how transparent they are, what kind of lighting specifically, the height, bollard lighting, where you expect that, the kinds of benches and other things that would be in the public realm. And you could go on and on and on. And those, when they're defined well, make for a great urban environment, make for a great pedestrian environment, and binds the city to a place in a way, and the way in the place is bound to the city, so the identity is really clear.
I find that interesting, that comment, because I think that's sort of the gap that probably a lot of residents have felt, that maybe they're interpreting this as a master plan, so where's that? And so it's good that you say that, because I think that as we continue to get more development happen in this, we're going to need more tools, and I think this is a great start. But we also have to be thinking always ahead as to how to improve the implementation of that.
That's correct.
I did have a specific question regarding there's the promenade, which we know it's all bike right now and pedestrian. But you have a west promenade and an east promenade. Those are car-based. Is that auto-based? Is that right?
Pedestrians first, cars second. Well, pedestrians, bicycles, cars in that order, and then service.
But autos can go on the east and west ones, whereas they don't in our.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So on the I guess it's the west promenade, it breaks at one point. And is there a plan for joining that, or how do you? I mean, that's not a true promenade in a sense, or.
Well, it kind of bends around the existing three-story apartment building.
So where would it go? Would it go back into the streets? Like if someone was on a bike, they'd hop off that and just get
Well, I
on
think
the
they
street?
would go around that, and I think you could partner with the owners of that building, which is a single building on a big grassy. Maybe it should be half building on the site with building on it, and the other half should be park or something like that. But there's some opportunities there. We didn't try to, identify specifically in that area what it should be, but it seemed like that needed to be connected up. We just didn't feel that we wanted to wind our we didn't want to overlay it on somebody else's property that way.
Okay, so that's private property. And then the purpose of the West Promenade is to give a bit of a more transition between the residential and everything to the east, which is
Correct.
starting to become a little more commercial
Right.
business.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the one on York, is that really sort of where the sidewalk lives right now when
Yeah, that's where the sidewalk lives today. There's all the single-family houses across the street, which is an area of transition. But as we look at that space, I mean, between the two cities, it's an opportunity to do some really nice things there and to make a really active street. But we wanted to begin first by setting some standards about how to respect the single-family houses across the street, which if that changes, that seems like a good thing, but it's going to create characteristics in that location that are different from, say, anything on the west side. So,
Thank you.
Returning now to this concept of a master plan and form-based guidance, I'm not an architect, but I'm a student of history. Can you give any suggestions of where you've seen these sort of plans be successfully implemented?
well, I think
In this sort of scale we're talking about.
Right. I think the study that I have done in particular, because I know this place pretty well, is Portland, Oregon, and really has to do with how the city has looked at corridors initially and what they expected in those corridors, both in terms of the characteristics of sidewalks, the characteristics of buildings, the kinds of landscaping. You had transit corridors, you had pedestrian streets, you had parks and other things that you wanted to connect up, and so they became very specific about overall heights in certain areas of the city. View corridors were important, so you can imagine a view of Mount Hood and the importance of that, or St. Helens before it blew its top, or any of those characteristics are the same, if you will, as what you would expect to have in terms of the quality of the promenade to the center, the Centennial Lakes, up to Fred Richards. I mean, that's your kind of heart, that's your big view, so that needs to be articulated in a greater way. And so that's why the master plan begins to be really important, and also defines characteristics that may be unique to that are different, say, from the west and east promenades. So each of those elements doesn't become the same element repeated over and over again, but the characteristics are unique.
Thank you, Mick.
Thank you.
So this is a public hearing. And is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak?
Could you put technology back on, please?
Okay. And are you going to be in the center there with the microphone, or?
That one?
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
My name is John Carlson. I live at 4433 Ellsworth Drive in Edina. And one of the issues that I'd like to just address a little bit is the design experience guideline. Is how directive is it, or how much of a guideline is it? And for the very first project that kind of went through under this, 7200, 7250, the developer actually used this slide to justify the transition zone. And I know you worked hard to help the Cornelia neighborhoods with the transition zone that was acceptable to us. And so this came in, and the council liked it, and the council issued a preliminary approval. So now the developer comes back for the TIF application, and he says, I'm not going to build the townhouses. What happens to the transition then? The transition is destroyed. The building as it's proposed should not be those heights. I'm not sure the council really accepted that, and they are trying to put penalties into the contract now to force the building of the townhomes. But this is a situation that could really be nasty and blow up. The townhomes now do not have to be built according to the proposal until the year 2027. You have a good document here, but if the developers are not going to conform to the intent of it, really, how good is it? If they can do their own program rather than follow the intent of the design guidance. So I guess that's kind of my question, is it directive enough on the developers? Mick mentioned that most of the development will be residential apartments. I'm not a fan of the huge density that it proposes. I'm probably in a minority on that, but I'll just state my position there. There's very little in there that I see regarding employment centers. If we're going to have all these people, we need quality employment centers to go along with them. The shared street, the Woonerf that's going in behind 7200, has a bill that the developer is asking for $4,900,000 for. The finances of what we're talking about now in this Southdale area are going to be staggering. And I'm sure there's someone that knows how to finance all of this, but I am troubled as to what it may mean for the residents. That's a lot of money for a one-block road. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
I move to close the public hearing.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. So now bring it back to the Planning Commission for comments, discussion. That's your cue. You want
Happy to talk. Thank you. I guess I'm getting a reputation. First of all, I don't know, I have a variety of thoughts. First of all, I just want to say that every time I see these design guidelines, I see something else that I like. I was part of the Southdale area working group, along with a few other people up here. It was a real pleasure to work with Mick and Sarah. It continues to be. I think you're outstanding. I think you did outstanding work. I want to give some credit to the City Council for seeing the need to take a long-term vision and say that we're going to go get somebody good to help us come up with the vision. I think that's great. And now I think we're far from done. I think even after this plan gets approved, that we're far from done. And I analogize it, and some of you have heard me talk about software before. This is like building the software. And now you still need to communicate it to the users and the people that will buy it about why it's good for them. And I think that you can call it implementation, you can call it launch, you can call it commercialization. All those phrases are used, but there needs to be a good plan about how we're going to get this plan out in the world and make people aware of it beyond just posting it on our website or putting it in the zoning ordinances. There needs to be some kind of way of identifying the users, identifying the user needs, the user processes, and how to make them aware of this plan, so that as soon as people think about Edina, they think Edina, great design guidelines, and then think about the user process, so they immediately think about building their proposals according to these guidelines. Not when they come in for sketch plan review, not when they come in to meet with the staff and say, well, they've put in a lot of money and a lot of to build a plan, and they've got their heart on the plan, because that's a hard time to change. That I think we really need to have a launch process for this that identifies the users and how they're going to use it, and reasons why they wouldn't use this, and what we're going to do to overcome that and make them feel like they want to use it. Remove all barriers to usage. Let's see. So, and I think that's a group of people. I mean, I think some of the things that we have in here that could be really publicized are the top 10 ideas, the top typologies. But I think that's a longer discussion. But I think it's one. I don't think we should say we're done and celebrate completion upon the approval of this plan. I think there's a lot of work to make it a really successful value for Edina. I want to talk just briefly about master plan, and then I'm finished. I mean, it's a great idea. I think Todd raised a good question about, well, how's this successful? And I have some concerns. I don't have experience with master plans, but I have the similar concerns, I think, where Todd's coming from. So I would suggest that before doing a master plan is to spend time identifying master plans that are successful and what made them successful, because I think it's easy just to go and put a group together, and that group is going to come up with an answer that may not be successful, but may meet that group's wish list. And it shouldn't be just a collection of wish lists. It should be something that, from the start, is thought about how do we. What the goal isn't to have a master plan. The goal is to have a great district, and we need to identify how master plans that create great districts have been built and how we can replicate that. So thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry that I'm getting a reputation, and thanks again, Mick and Sarah.
It wasn't a reputation you tried to discuss before we could. It's not your reputation you were trying to discuss before we were ready, so I was punting it back to you. Is there other discussion? Comments? Sue?
Chris, I was wondering if we could get some background on what was referenced by Mr. Carlson in regards to is 7250, I guess, 7200, 7250, and the townhomes? I thought it was one project, so.
I guess I'd have to get back to you on that. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to in terms of that the townhomes aren't going to be built, so.
Right, that's what I heard. So they are not going to be built. Is that correct? We don't know that?
We would have to get back to you.
Yeah.
Okay. That's something we should think about, as we do bigger and bigger PUDs, and they have different components of it. Does it match the intent? Now we have no transition zone to the residential area, so they wait for, what was the year? I don't know, another 10 years. I think that kind of in some ways goes back to how we address in the comp plan, what are the goals? If increased density was permitted there, and we love the idea of having different types of housing, and we got 20% affordable units.
Can we keep the discussion on the design guidelines, though?
It is about that. It is
Okay.
about that. So if the design guidelines calls for one thing, and we are saying, oh, yeah, we will honor that, our comp plan has to acknowledge and make sure that that also is workable. So this is an issue where here's a perfect test case. We did use the design guidelines, as far as I knew, in the acceptance of that project. So it worked well, like it should have, but then you get further down the road and something like this can happen. So I think it's just something worth considering, and in the comp plan that we're clear about what the goal is. What the goal is. I understand the design experiences are one thing, but recall why this project was approved. It wasn't strictly that. It was also a big part of it to gain those 20% affordable units and the other types of housing.
So we'll get the information on that next time. Sounds like it had something to do with TIF. So any other comments on design guidelines? Or I'm just going to add too, I really, really like this. Of course, I've been, married to it for 4 years. But I really appreciate what you've done with this preface, and I think that really helps tie it in and clearly, work out their companion pieces. So I appreciate your work for that, and you too, Michael, for adding comments to that. So, Chris, are we recommending approval of this? What's the action on this?
You could recommend approval on it. You do have to take an action on it.
Okay. So is there? Okay.
Could you just state what the process is, where this goes from here? What are we approving? It's not actually approving it because it still has to go to council, yada, yada.
Right, we're recommending approval of this document to be passed on to the council.
And has there been, and all the public input sessions have already been done? Is that correct? So tonight would be a public hearing, and there's one more public hearing with the city council, but essentially all public engagement, everything has been done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to second what you said earlier. I didn't get to live with it as long as you did, but I spent a good 18 months with it, and it was a delight. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it enormously. I hate to say it. I'm kind of sorry it's over in a way. and you must be so relieved you can hardly stand it. But I think, the thing that we know and that the discussion around here has been is that we're not done. It's the beginning. It's not the end. But what a magnificent beginning, and what a vision. It is, for me at least, an opportunity to leave those meetings and imagine the future and think what a delightful place it's possible to create there out of something that's really asphalt and parking lots, and to vision what a place for my kids and my grandkids, what a place for me, what an absolutely enjoyable city that we can make here. What an opportunity. And three things. To see that opportunity. For the city of Edina to say, this nearly idle land has a future. Wow. Go to Brooklyn Park and see what they saw. Isn't that exciting? And then to put the people in the forefront of it. Instead of saying the most important thing here is the economy. Well, of course it's important, and it's in here, and it's part of it. But it isn't the driver. The driver is the people, because the people are what are going to make the economy sing. The people are what's going to make it delightful and joyful. And to have it be flexible enough that it isn't about cars, because we know the world is changing. It accepts the reality of today and looks for the opportunity of tomorrow. I'm so tickled to see it, and to think that 10 years from now I can say, yeah, I was there, I saw that happen. How fun. And I look forward to the master plan and what that might be. But I think Edina will owe you a large debt for a long time. And let's just hang on long enough to see it.
Thank you.
I move approval of the design guidelines as submitted.
Great. Is there a second? Second. Discussion?
Could I suggest that we also add the preface as
It's
part of
in
the
there.
approval? Oh,
It's been,
It's just been incorporated?
yeah, correct. Well, let's clarify that.
Including the preface.
Including the
Okay,
preface. So
fine,
the
thank you.
preface that's in here is the same as this preface?
The one that's on the dais is the updated one.
So we would then, okay. Got it, thank you. So, is that one clear on that motion? Okay, great. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. So next is community comment, and this is an opportunity to speak about something that's not on the agenda tonight. Is there anyone here who would like to speak?
I move to close community comment.
Is there a
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Under reports and recommendations, we have the comprehensive plan update. Kick it back over to you, Emily or Chris. You guys want to
Thank you. I think we kind of covered some of that ground. You do have posters that Emily handed all of you to post for our March 11th open house. We'll be in contact with all of you, and we will be giving you some job duties for that soon.
And so do we have some for these guys too, or?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
That's it.
That's it, okay, so, so we might as well just follow through. So it's going to be March 11th, 6:30 to 8:30 at the Edina Public Works Park Maintenance Facility.
That's correct.
Yep. And it's really just to come and learn about the comp plan.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments on that? No? Okay. Chair or member comments? Go ahead. Sure.
I might have mentioned it before, but figure I mention it again. So I have two comments. One is somewhat related to the discussion today. So a colleague of mine at a local design firm who has a background in urban planning also serves on the Congress for the New Urbanism, and their charge is really to help encourage to build more places people love, and a lot of it's oriented around the design experience, like we talked about, making them more walkable. So they have a annual conference this year in the summer. June is Louisville. However, next year it is in the Twin Cities. So I don't know if I mentioned it, but in contact with them, and they're really looking to target places. So like Edina is definitely a prominent one that they're going to at least focus on, and what that looks like is getting people there in person for like walking tours of areas. So Southdale's a very obvious expression of what they're trying to do, and the things that we're doing with how we're addressing Southdale is kind of right up what they want to talk about and encourage in different communities. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. So just a note as the time approaches, just for city staff as well as certain liaisons in the community that would like to, be there and help champion different walking tours or information debriefs. Like this group right here is a pretty good group to, if one of us were wanting to get involved with that in some way. So that's an exciting thing and kind of good timing with where we're at now in the process. I thought that was fitting.
Jenny, before you go on, so are they looking for submittals for proposals or presentations or? So
not really. It's kind of informal, but at least from the conversations I've had, like Edina is definitely where they're gonna focus some of those things on. So if we just as a city, and maybe we could have the planning department get connected with some of them to just make it an easier process for them to plan. So it's cool. So that'll be a cool way to show off, and they do a lot of hype nationally over where they go. So it could put Edina. I think the conference is in St. Paul. I think it's maybe at the depot or it's downtown somewhere there. So they'll have a couple areas they're focusing on, but definitely Edina is one of them. So that's cool. And then second comment, I was just reading. The city of Bloomington recently adopted some new affordable housing policy on Monday. I don't know how familiar we are with what they did, because it's supposed to be very innovative, and I just wanted to see, is it much more innovative than what we have? It seemed similar, but they're really proud of it, and maybe are there things that we can learn from what they implemented, and I don't know if anyone else has background in that. Okay.
Stephanie's aware of it and has been working on it.
Okay. 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 Because it'd be maybe just next time or whatever, we could get just some information just so we could see how we can be more relevant or keep leading. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Any other? Commissioner Lee?
We're coming to the end of almost 2 to 3 years of the comp comprehensive planning process. So I just wanted to mention that this comes with a lot of hours that were put in by many, many people, all of our boards and commissions, and of course right now we're in the spreadsheet phase where all of us have been asked to, as planning commissioners who are members, one and the same, of the Comprehensive Task Force, to submit our comments on each chapter. And it's a long process, but we think that in the outcome in the end will make for a very strong document. So as this becomes available for public review, we are looking forward to receiving really, really good feedback in a general sense, obviously, because there is obviously past the time of trying to do any type of severe editing or rewriting, but of course we'll accept all comments. And the city just sent emails out, so I know I received 2 or 3 or more regarding the platform on which residents can comment on the comprehensive plan. So it is through this, you may have heard, Better Together website. It's planned to replace, in a sense, Speak Up. But what we heard tonight in our work session just before this meeting was a very good format where the chapters will be available for review by residents. And right on that page, they can download a copy and then submit comments. So every comment will be collected, and we will be looking at it, as well as the consulting team. And where we can make some changes to improve it, we certainly will. But I just wanted to make sure that, at least in this long process, that the residents are involved through the boards and commissions, and of course your feedback to any one of us through the years. And we'll continue to take those comments. So please be on guard, attend the meeting, and submit your comments. You have a 30-day window. So, and then the document will go out for all surrounding cities, adjacent cities to review.
Thank you. All right, anything else, Todd? Didn't you get, oh, okay.
Motion to close the meeting?
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries.